back to the Sam Sorbo Show. I'm Sam Sorbo, and I'm being joined now by my next guest. I'm very excited to speak to this individual. Matthew Embry is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. He's also an advocate for patients with multiple sclerosis. And he did this documentary. I'll be honest, I watched it. It's called Living Proof. And I said, I have to talk to this man because the documentary was amazing. But not only that, he seems to be amazing. And so I just thought, I got to talk to this guy and find out what's making him tick. First of all, I know that he has a very strong relationship with his dad, which is something that was evident in the film. And I was really touched by the film. I encourage you. It's funny because Matthew, I don't know if you know this. I looked up on Amazon Prime. I was looking for my film, which is Let There Be Light, because I wanted to share it with somebody and just send them the link. And I scrolled down, and your film, Living Proof, was the suggested, like, if you've already seen this one, watch this one instead. And it's so funny because yours is a documentary that doesn't deal with supernatural. Like, I don't know. It was just kind of funny. Mine's a drama, yours is a documentary, but it was the suggested one. And so I got curious. I watched the trailer. I think anybody who watches the trailer will want to watch the movie. So I encourage people, just go to Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime. Living Proof is the name of the movie. And the reason that it's called Living Proof is because here right now we have Living Proof because Matthew is with us. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that kind introduction and for having me today.
Yeah. And you also have a fantastic voice. So this works well on radio also.
Right.
All right. So you're a filmmaker by trade, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And yet at 19, you were diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want to just walk us through? Everybody's heard of MS. There's tons of fundraisers and stuff. And in fact, you go into this a little bit in the movie at what a big business it is, raising money to find the cure for MS. And then we'll get into perhaps what you've discovered might be a reasonable facsimile of a cure, let's say. But talk to us, when you got diagnosed, what did it mean to you and what was the prognosis?
Yeah, I mean, multiple sclerosis is a degenerative disease, which I think, most people have heard of, but don't necessarily know a lot about it. We've got stars like Annette Funicello and, Richard Pryor. These are the people in the past that have been big in the media. And those were the types of people that I was aware of at that age. We're going back to 1995 here. And I think when I was diagnosed, and those are the types of images that come into your mind, right? I mean, the prognosis is unknown at that point. MS can go really fast, or it can take a long time to play out. But I mean, back then, especially before that, it was known as diagnosis audiosis, and that, there wasn't much you could do. That was just about the time that, pharmaceuticals were coming online, and you weren't given necessarily the best outcomes in the future.
But what is the definition of MS? Because, it's degenerative. Okay. But in what way? Like, I believe it's that your body starts attacking your nerves. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. Slowly. So the myelin sheath around the nerve slowly gets attacked by your own body. And that results in a number of problems neurologically. So you just slowly, incrementally lose cognitive function, you lose motor functions, and that just can get worse and worse and worse. And I think another term you hear is, cane bed dead. And that sounds terrible, but that is kind of how it seems to work.
Like the progression is first you become debilitated physically. And then there's no way of getting better, right?
Well, and this is the question, right? There's no known cause right now. There's no known cure. This is the fear of the disease. And I think it's, in a lot of ways you get set up for a steady, downhill descent. And so it can be
the diagnosis is simply putting a label on something for which they have no explanation. And I think that's such an important thing for people to understand. Just because the medical community has pointed at something and named it doesn't mean they understand it. In fact, we've named gravity, but we still don't understand it. We just know that it's a force that masses attract masses, and we don't understand why, but we've named it. And so people think that, oh, so we've got that sussed out. In fact, all they did for you was they noticed that you had symptoms that lined up with something called multiple sclerosis. And so they diagnosed you with this condition because you were exhibiting those symptoms, but they don't really understand it.
Yeah, I mean, this again, this is a really complicated question, right? And I think that, we do understand what the disease can do. That's for sure. And so I think the question is, okay, so once you've been labeled, which I think, it's funny, words are really important. And I think that one of the terms people use in multiple sclerosis is progressive MS. That's one of the types. Right. And that means, you're progressively getting worse. And I own that. And I say, no, I'm going to be progressive MS. I'm going to progressively get better. So it's about taking that same term and flipping it. And,
that's incredibly here. It's terribly courageous, because typically the doctor tells you something and you believe him because we're trained to believe the experts. And so you rest in that. And then you're stuck with that death sentence. But you guys, and I include your dad in this, you said, no, hold on, back the truck up, because we're gonna try to turn this on its head. We're not gonna just accept what you're telling us. Now, you probably don't know this. My husband had 3 strokes when he was a young man, and the doctor said after 3 or 6 or 8 months, we talked to many different doctors, but they all said after a certain amount of time, that's the most that you can expect to recover from the brain damage. And I'll tell you, after 3 and 6 and 8 months, pretty much he was still, laying on the couch drooling. It took him 3 years to fully recover, but
right.
fully recover he did. And they didn't tell him that he could. They told him that he couldn't. And so his big message is, don't allow other people to set your limitations. You define yourself. You define your limitations, which is what you've done with this life that you've lived. But more importantly, your dad was big in that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was very blessed. My mom as well was a nurse, so she had some background with multiple sclerosis, and my dad was a research geologist. So the two of them together, I mean, my dad just, he went to work and did what he did. And that's, he went deep into the research with MS and looked at the history of it and, some of the other things that surrounded it. And nutrition was, what he discovered really quickly, nutritional strategies that, may have in my opinion, do have an enormous impact on the course of the disease.
Wait, are you saying that things that you put in your body affect how your body behaves?
Yeah.
It boggles the mind that this isn't something that is sort of widely accepted and known.
Yeah, I mean, again, and that's hopefully what Living Proof is trying to do, is to get that message out there and say, look, we understand how, these medical ecosystems work, and they're very complex. And I think, for me in the past, I mean, that movie was made like 4 years ago. So I've settled down a lot since then. There's a lot of anger and things that I expressed, and I've really tried to step back from that and step into a more positive space of, okay, here's how this system works, and here are the outcomes of that system. Here are the likely outcomes. But there's other ways to do things, especially when it comes to your own health and advocating for yourself. And that's one of the key messages. And just listening to your story and that journey, it's about, listening to what the experts are going to tell you, but then you need to decide, okay, am I going to go further? Like that, they've set the limitations. They've, put the ceiling there for me, but am I going to push beyond it? And that's really what my message is today, even like, hey, like you decide where you want to go, but you're going to have to work for it. It's not going to be easy.
Right. You can't just point and say, I'll take that life, and then assume that that's the life that you're going to have. You have to work for it, and you have to design it. You have to envision it, and then you have to build it.
Exactly.
One thing that, so I do want to talk about this because your dad really impressed me. He's a geologist, which means that he's a scientist, but does not mean that he's medically inclined. Mm-hmm. When his 19-year-old son was diagnosed with really a dreadful disease that had not a good prognosis. I mean, the experts said back then, I'm sure, it's downhill. And there's, and the end is the grave. It's just downhill to the grave. And your dad said, well, let's do some research. Let's test that theory, right? So the scientist in him came out, but still the medical aspect. And so he started experimenting with you, right?
I don't even know if it was experimenting. I mean, he just did the work, and he came across the research that that demonstrated that nutrition played a role in the process of this disease. And he's a matter of fact kind of guy. He's really black and white in ways. I'm just kind of like it's this way, right? And I'm similar. And I think you probably see that in the movie. And once I learned it, and my mind just for some reason it really switched for me. I just got it, right? It just made sense. Like there's certain foods I got to avoid, and it just made sense. And I had to
Did
rebuild.
you feel when you ate the foods that were the wrong foods? And I do want to kind of go through that a little bit in a little bit of detail, because I think it's important for people to understand that just because this food is bad for somebody with MS doesn't mean that it's necessarily good for other people, right?
Right.
Just because you have a sensitivity to it doesn't mean that I don't have a sensitivity to it, even though it doesn't affect me as strongly as it affects you. But now I've talked too much and I can't remember my question. Oh, the foods. When you ate something that was maybe should have been restricted, did you notice immediately?
Well, that's a good question. I think for me, it was incremental. I mean, when you're young, you don't really know any different. It wasn't until afterwards, when I started to redo my diet, that you really start to feel it, right? And that's you eat that way for so long, you're just used to being tired most of the time, right? Like
so you saw a lessening of symptoms, but once you if I eat sugar late at night, I wake up with pain.
Sure.
And now I know if I eat sugar late at night, I wake up in pain.
Yeah, makes
Is it
sense.
worth it? So I just do this sort of balance. Okay, is it worth it because I really want that chocolate cake, or maybe I shouldn't because I want to go running in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Did you have that kind of thing, like what your dad said? You really shouldn't eat pickles or whatever it is, and you're like, Dad, you're 19, you're 20, right? You're 21.
Yeah. No, I went to work, to be honest. I just clicked. I love life, and I love life back then. I mean, I'm that kind of person, and I wanted to have a future. And I could see it really clearly. I could just see those long-term outcomes like really quick in my mind. I knew if I went to work now, but I'm 44 now, I'm in fantastic shape, and I'm not boasting. It's just, it was a program. And I had the discipline because I knew what the outcomes were going to be, or could be. I want to say could, because you don't know for sure, right? But I was definitely, and people criticize me for this, but I used fear to drive me. I harnessed that fear, right?
Who criticizes you for that?
Well, I just like people write me, you shouldn't live in fear and all this kind of thing. And I'm like, well, I don't, but fear is a natural emotion, and I think I've just learned how to channel it and how to stick it into, to drive me to be disciplined and things like that. Right.
You know what? That's funny. I bristle at that. How dare they? Let them get a diagnosis, right? Let them,
yeah.
Of course the fear drives you. And what a fantastic show of courage to allow the fear not to take control, but to give you the power to fight back, right? To empower you to say, no, fear, you back down now.
Right. And then to channel it. And, and I'm no different with anger and things like that. Like I really work on those emotions to channel them in the right direction daily.
You were very emotional in the movie. And I also thought it was actually quite brave. You directed, right?
Yep.
So you had the choice. Do I put in the crying bit? Your filmographer was great because he didn't cut the camera. And I have to say the editing was fantastic because at the beginning of the movie, you show sort of a preview. And by the way, I got my husband to watch the movie with me. And I told him that I thought it was going to be an uplifting story because I saw the trailer. And so I was excited to see it. And we sat down, and boy, it's hard hitting the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie, or whatever. My impression was that it's very hard hitting. And he was getting very uncomfortable because he's been through
Right.
so much, nearly dying and nearly losing everything and being a vegetable and all of that stuff. And so he's watching this and going, this is not fun. You know, he doesn't watch hospital shows for the same reason, right? And then it switched. And so the storytelling of the movie is really impactful. Um, I want to take a quick break because on radio, I have to take a break here,
Sure.
and finish the show. But the rest of this interview is going to be available to you on sorbos.locals.com. I want to talk about, you said your emotions you've shifted, and you've done some things with your emotional being these days. And I want to talk to you a little bit about faith and a little
Sure.
bit more about diet. So stay with me or join me over at locals.com, sorbos.locals.com. And for my Mojo 50 listeners, thank you so much for listening. YouTube, I'll be back with another segment later. Hi, I'm Sam Sorbo. Thanks for watching me here. If you want more great content, go to sorbos.locals.com and don't forget to subscribe with the button below.